Welcome, everybody. Today we have Nick Pinkerton on, a fellow YouTuber and a writer from the Hockey Writers. Welcome, Nick. Round of applause.
Oh, thank you for the welcome there, José. It's fantastic to be on this channel and to be collaborating with you. Hopefully the first time of many interactions between us in this regard.
Now, Nick, for the viewers who don't know who you are, tell them about your channel and what you do for the Hockey Writers.
Sounds great. So my YouTube channel is called Twisted Wrister Hockey. It's not actually affiliated with the Hockey Writers, but I'll get into that. So on my channel, my specialties, I like to say, are hockey history and culture. So culture it's kind of hard to really define that when it comes to a sport, but when you think of things like jerseys and logos and just traditions and fan related content, I would say that's what I really want to capture on my channel. I personally didn't grow up playing hockey, so I want to play that angle more so and produce kind of like mini documentary-esque videos. I had a lot more earlier on in my channel, but I want to kind of get back into that as well. And another specialty of mine on that channel is the San Jose Sharks. That is my favorite team, but now I live in KRAKEN territory, so I'm in North Idaho, but Spokane in Eastern Washington is just over the border. And so I decided to see what kind of content I could create as a writer. And so the hockeywriters.com brought me on as a contributor. So now I'm actually covering the Kraken. And today we found out that they're going to actually have their first preseason game in Spokane. And so I'm just absolutely thrilled about that. And we'll just see where this opportunity takes me.
Let's dive into this now. What direction do you think that GM Ron Francis is going to go with this team? And do you think they're going to be competitive right off the bat like Vegas has been? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of an open canvas for Ron Francis and for the coaching staff, honestly. I say that in part because they have the same expansion draft rules as Vegas does. And of course, we know that they were able to get players like David Perron and James Neal and some other folks out there who were diamonds in the rough and just set career highs. So they have the opportunity to do that in the expansion draft. You know, we're going to talk about some players, and it seems like they're going to have a fairly good amount of proven NHL talents out there to select from. So that's kind of one way to look at it. Then you look at the division that they'll be playing in, the Pacific Division, and it looks arguably, I think, weaker than even when Vegas went into the league. When they broke in 2017, you still had those three good teams in California. But other than that, it was kind of like, well, I don't know if Calgary is going to take the next step forward, and Arizona is kind of in a rut. And so you look at the way that Seattle comes into this, and I think that the only teams you can really say are playoff locks are Vegas and probably Edmonton, even though they don't really do anything once they get in.
Right.
Calgary's kind of enigmatic, and Vancouver took, they regressed quite a bit this past season, to say the least, even though I think they have the talent to probably get back into the postseason. But outside of that, I think Los Angeles is at that point where they can maybe flirt with a spot in that division, but I can't be super confident about that. Anaheim, I think, has at least another year because they have, a lot of prospects who just need some experience out there first and foremost. San Jose, my team, I mean, they're just spiraling downward. I thought that they were going to bounce back this year. I don't see any reason why that would change next season. And who am I missing here? Because Arizona is going to the Central. So, yeah, so I think that Seattle has almost as good of a chance as a team like Los Angeles or Vancouver, Calgary at getting into that fourth spot, maybe even that third spot, to be frank.
In saying that, what do you think about their new coaching hires?
Yeah.
And what does that tell you about their direction?
To be honest, I don't know a whole lot about Dave Haxtell because, his sample size is only 4 seasons in the NHL, and with a franchise that is also sort of Jekyll and Hyde, right? One year they're good, the next year they're not good. And that's been repeating for at least a decade now. So I'm willing to give him a pass on that. And the thing is that you look at the coaching staff, they have personnel who are certainly experienced, not necessarily at the NHL level, but I don't know. I think that it's interesting how they're kind of taking a more fresh look when it comes to coaching. So they brought in most recently Paul McFarland, who was very successful at not only juniors, but also at the NHL level as an assistant coach with the Maple Leafs and with the Panthers. So in the 3 years that he was behind a bench there, you're talking about good offensive clubs. You look like, for example, Barkov set a career high with McFarland behind the bench. Huberdeau did, Dodonov. And then on the other side of things with Toronto in the 2019-20 season, I think they were like 6th in goals for average or 5th, tied for 5th. And they were also 3rd in power play. So he's going to hone in on the forward group. And then defensively, they're bringing in former NHL player Jay Leach. And he did a pretty good job, in his own right at the AHL level with the Providence Bruins. So I looked at how the team was defensively, just, looking at the stats. You don't really have that much access to information with a team or a league like the AHL, but nonetheless, in two of his 3 seasons, they were 2nd in the league in goals against average. I think they were 6th in one of them. And then I didn't look at this last year so much because, they only played in their division, or at least some teams took that approach, but their goals against average was only 2.40. So he must be doing something right over there as well. He's worked with, guys like Charlie McAvoy, and I think Connor Clifton was a part of that. So I think that, why not give him a shot at the NHL level as well? And it's nice because in that way, there aren't these sort of expectations of, okay, well, we brought in this big name, so the results have to be there. I don't think that's the case with Seattle. Vegas didn't do that so much with Gallant either, because really he only had maybe 6 years of head coaching experience at the NHL level. And so I frankly, I like the approach that they're taking. And Ron Francis as GM, I think that locals in that area should be on board.
So they're really honing in on perhaps developing more of a younger team, not necessarily to say that they may not go after any veterans that we'll touch on when you go over your expansion list there. But does that indicate to you at all that perhaps, even though the Pacific seems to be wide open right now, does that indicate to you, unlike the Vegas Golden Knights, that they might be in this for more of the long run as opposed to trying to get into the Cup finals, within the first couple of seasons?
That's a great question. I mean, you would think so, right? But it was amazing how Vegas, right? It's really about what they did right after the expansion draft. So we have to look not just at July 21st. We got to look at the couple of weeks resulting from that, because Vegas, that's how they got themselves Riley Smith. That's how they got themselves also, I believe, Shea Theodore as well. So they made some key moves there, and also before the trade deadline in their first season, that's how they got Ryan Reeves, who, say what you will about his antics, but the guy was effective on the ice in those first couple seasons, especially. So they had that clicking for them. But then that's when they were like, okay, we're almost there. We just need to make one more move. And I think that they kind of kept repeating that. And that's how they sort of ended up kind of not mortgaging the future necessarily, but they ended up putting themselves in that win now mode, I would say. So I don't know if we can say the same about Seattle. I think it will hinge on what they do right after the expansion draft as well. So, I've been very interested in kind of tracking Ron Francis because I admire the work that he did in Carolina. And, Waddell absolutely has earned respect around the league for some of his moves too, So I wonder if we're going to get a similar kind of team out of an expansion team. It'll be interesting to see if there's kind of a comparison between both what we saw in Carolina and what we could see in Seattle. You and I grew up in an era where we saw a lot of expansion teams. The Ducks, they took a few seasons to get good. Florida was a bit of an outlier. They had that lightning in a bottle season when they lost to the Avalanche in the Cup final. But they still had struggles after that as well. We saw teams like the Ottawa Senators. They had a woeful start to their time as an expansion franchise. After about 8 or 9 years, they became a really good team for a good stretch there. So will Seattle actually say, hey, we're an expansion franchise, we need to build a foundation? Or will they go into Vegas mode and then start selling off prospects? So who's to say what we're going to be treated to in the months ahead?
Let's dive right into your list here, in which you've looked at each NHL team and hypothesized on 1 to 3 players who you think might get picked from each.
Oh my gosh. So, well, I have this in no order whatsoever. It's whatever I saw on capfriendly.com. Yeah, right. Chaos rules. The nice thing is that we start with the Cup champions. That's good. So Tampa, I've seen a couple names out there that could potentially be exposed just because they're that good. And I think that they would certainly realize that. You could get somebody like Yanni Gourde, who at 5.16 million is not cheap whatsoever, but you got to think about what he did in his rookie season. He was actually an offensive force there. And so he's a versatile player. He's got 5.16 million a year for 4 years. He's in his prime. I wouldn't put it past us to maybe see him go to Seattle. Palat, Cirelli, one of those guys could be an odd man out. Chernak would be one of the best picks in the expansion draft because you have to, of course, worry about Hedman, McDonough, and you got Sergachev, of course. And he's making $2.95 million for the next 2 years. He's only 24 years old, I think. So that would be a terrific pick. I definitely like his play. Who do you want me to talk about next?
Let's talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Sure. Well, you guys extended Dermott. So do you hold on to him, though? I'm not entirely sure because I think either him or Justin Holt could be exposed there. Would the Kraken be curious in Jason Spezza? Because how are you going to, you're going to have, if you protect him, you're going to let somebody else go,
What I hear from that is going to be similar to what happened last year when the Leafs put Spezza on waivers in order to make room to bring another player back into the lineup. And is basically, he told his agent and the agent told everyone else that if you grab him on waivers, he's just going to retire.
Coming to movie theaters and streaming platforms near you, how Spezza got his groove back.
Yeah, it's amazing how good he's been this past year. How much he's improved. I mean, at one point he had more points than Josh Anderson up until, I want to say, the final.
Wow, you don't say.
Yeah, I think that's going to be like, you pick me, I'll retire.
Imagine this, though. Imagine this. Seattle's tandem in goal could very well be Freddie Anderson and Jake Allen.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
Anderson's a UFA, but I mean, still, you've got Campbell under contract, and he, stood on his head in much of that season, obviously.
Yeah, I can totally see them going after Anderson. I mean, for so many reasons. Although he had a bad year this past one, and he's now hit the 30 mark, I believe. I digress. Who's next? Let's talk about Arizona. How about that?
Arizona. Ooh, boy. Oh, I just talked to AZ Sports Guy yesterday, and that's Matt Jacobson. He is, of course, a Coyotes fan. And what's crazy is that their defensive core could be made over entirely, especially if a team like Boston gets Ekman Larson. So they have like 4 or 5 UFA veteran defensemen, guys like Jason Demers, Alex Goligoski, Jordan Osterley. So you have kind of that component of things if they want to bring some like a veteran defenseman in on the cheap in that sense. Then you look at goaltending. This is also a really interesting situation because you have Kemper under contract for 1 more year. Aiden Hill, I believe, is an RFA. And Kemper, of course, has been in the Vezina conversation. He's 31, though. So even though he's $4.5 million, that's a good value for a guy who's still in his prime. So what does Arizona do there? Not to mention Ronta, who I don't think they're going to bring back as a UFA. So I find that particularly intriguing. Lawson Krause, that's another name I want to put out there because he played for Paul McFarland. So there you go.
Let's move on. How about the Anaheim Ducks?
Okay, got it right here. So Carter Rowney, he played for Dave Haxtell. So if you want like a real bargain bin deal right there and somebody who's just going to primarily play in the defensive zone, I've made the case for him on thehockeywriters.com. So there's a whole article where I talk about guys who played with Haxtell in North Dakota, not Philadelphia. So people can check that out. Do they take a bite on somebody like Henrique? Because I know the Ducks have entertained the idea of moving him. They put him on waivers last year. So, but the thing is that his contract is running, he'll be a little long in the tooth there. So I'm not sure. Other than that, I really just see maybe a bottom 6 player for Anaheim who maybe I'm probably not as familiar with. Go to the Edmonton Oilers. So a couple guys I looked at, UFAs. You have Ennis and you have Alex Chason. Kyle Turris has 1 year left at $1.65 million. That's not bad for a guy who could play third line center, but of course he hasn't really worked out anywhere in the last couple of years. Josh Archibald's not bad as well. And then goalie Alex Stalock, 1 year left at $785,000, was really good for Minnesota in the 2019-20 season, maybe a bottom 6 defenseman. So those are the names there. Sharks, they don't really have that much that they could expose that would be attractive. I don't see them like saying, oh, Brent Burns, you'll get snatched up even though you have like 5 more years at $8 million left. So I don't see that happening with him. Of the big players, I could think maybe Kevin LeBanc, who was given, I believe, way too much money in the offseason when you compare him and a similar position, a similar skill set, Tyler Toffoli got, I think, less money to play for the Canadiens.
What did
And he
LeBanc
panned
get?
out well. LeBanc, I think he got like 4.75 over 4 years, I want to say.
Slightly more than Toffoli, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that general management banked way too much on the 2018-2019 season when you still had Joe Pavelski and Joe Thornton. So Timo Meier and Kevin LeBanc, wingers who played with those two veteran centers, their production just has tanked the last 2 years, or their trajectory, I would say. So anyway, LeBanc would be one pick. Another one would be Radim Šimić, kind of a second pairing or bottom pairing defenseman there. Good value contract. So I think that maybe those are the names I would see in San Jose. Calgary, I was kind of uncertain about. Maybe Josh Levo if you're looking for a UFA to possibly sign. Other than that, no other real names jumped out at me there. For Vancouver, the guy who I would like to see them take is Tyler Mott. I think he has a good defensive skill set. Just over $1 million for a year left. Matthew Highmore, he kind of burst onto the scene in last year's playoffs with Chicago, $725K for 1 year. Other names out there, Pearson or maybe even Virtanen, to kind of take a bit of a gamble on him. Okay, Boston Bruins. So interestingly enough, Kasha is an RFA. I don't know if he's going to get a deal extended to him. I mean, he's really just fallen off since his first year or two with the Ducks. Sean Corrali, maybe Craig Smith. I think that would be kind of interesting. Guy who was kind of a perennial 20-goal scorer with Nashville, $3.1 million for 2 more years. They should be more focused on signing a guy like Taylor Hall. So the wing, the other side of the wing or the other wing, they can, I'm sure they could fill somebody else in there if they've got Hall and Krejci on that line together like they did in the playoffs. So I think Craig Smith would probably be the biggest fish that you might see come out for the Bruins. Ottawa, this would be an interesting one. Yevgeny Dodonov, he didn't work out quite as well with them, and he doesn't necessarily fit with the future of that franchise because he's already in his 30s. Very skilled playmaker, 2 years left at $5 million. Bit of a steep price, but you put him on a first line, maybe that could possibly work out. Nicholas Paul would be kind of a good value contract there too, 1 year at $1.35 million. Buffalo, the best pick I found there, because there really wasn't all that much, was Drake Caggiula. He's a UFA though. However, he did play with Dave Haxtell at North Dakota. So Detroit, I couldn't really find anybody notable per se. You got a couple UFAs like Jonathan Bernier for goal. Mark Stahl's a UFA if you need kind of a bottom pairing defenseman probably at this point. You could kind of have a reclamation project with somebody like Richard Panik or maybe Vladimir Mesnikov. But I didn't really see all that much there. They have a lot of veteran UFAs there. So that's probably what you might see be added to the roster at some point, if anything. Florida. So they have a couple good options to fit in the middle six. Don't be surprised if like Frank Vetrano could possibly be drafted by them. Noel Acciari, I love the intensity he plays with. Even on defense, you might find a guy like a Marcus Nudavara or Radko Gudas. And then interestingly enough, I'm curious to see what happens with Chris Drieger because he's a UFA. And of course, they're strapped with Bobrovsky and they'll have Spencer Knight coming in as the future. So we'll see what happens with him. And then Montreal, I thought maybe a second pairing defenseman, Ben Sherratt he could possibly be an odd man out, or a Brett Kulak. But I already mentioned earlier, Jake Allen. I think that with the season he just had, he could look pretty good as a split starter there in Seattle. So Pittsburgh, one of their defensemen could be left open. And so you might see a longtime Penguin like Brian Dumoulin pack his bags for Seattle. 2 years left at $4.1 million, a pretty good stay-at-home defenseman there. In free agency, who knows what could happen to a guy like Jeff Carter? I mean, he burst onto the scene well with them. Jason Zucker was kind of interesting, but I think he's a bit of a steep cap hit at this point, given the last couple of years. He's had some injury troubles. He's at 2 years left at $5.5 million. Casey DeSmith, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him as well. I think he has 1 year left, I want to say, at $1.25 million. So a couple of good names there in Pittsburgh. New York Islanders, this is a team that's going to lose something. They're going to lose something in the middle six, I would think, because they're kind of cap strapped right now. They have just a great group of forwards, especially that Seattle could choose from. I don't have anybody specifically from that side of things, but if you look at UFAs, Travis Zajac played for Dave Haxtell. I know it was like 15 years ago, right. But he might be looking for a new home because of the cap situation there. Washington, I know everybody's been talking about TJ Oshie, but management has said that they intend to keep him. I do find it pretty interesting though that they bring in Hextall, whom he played for at North Dakota. So I'm curious to see if
isn't Oshie, if they pick him, isn't he the instant captain there?
I would hope so, man. That'd be terrific. He's like my favorite player outside of my favorite team. So I'd love to see it. The offseason, a big talking point just in general is going to be Yevgeny Kuznetsov. 4 years left at $7.8 million. So steep. I could see maybe Washington retaining some salary to move him elsewhere. Not sure about Seattle. Hagelin, Sherry are a couple other names, along with on the backside of things, Justin Schultz or Dmitry Orlov. I mean, that'd be something if Orlov got snatched up, kind of like I mentioned Dumoulin earlier.
Both of them are coming off of decent years. So,
and then Philadelphia, not entirely sure about this, even though, Hextall, of course, the history there. I thought maybe the best value would be Justin Braun, because I think he was not even at $2 million. Veteran defenseman, kind of playing bottom pairing now, but he's had a good track record as a stay-at-home defenseman. New York, Georgiev, because Shesterkin's an RFA. And so he's
very tempting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was the standout there. Columbus, again, a goaltender, because the situation with Merzlikins and with Korpisalo. So they have to choose one of those guys going forward. I'm curious to see what happens with Line, though. Just that's kind of a side note.
Right.
So a lot of good goaltenders could potentially be coming to the Emerald City. Carolina, this is a situation that kind of reminds me of Colorado. They have, and kind of like the Islanders as well, they have a few players like Nino Niederreiter, who could potentially be, like a 55 point producer. 1 year left at $5.25 million. In his prime, he could get snatched up. Other than that, I think of kind of some sandpaper players on the third line, like a Cedric Paquette. I think he's a UFA though, as is Brock McGinn. Peter Mrazek, something's going to happen with him in the offseason. Brady Shea would be the most notable defenseman if they choose to go that route. Depends on obviously what happens with Dougie Hamilton, but Shea was eating some big minutes in the playoffs when Slavin was out too. And then the Devils, I actually wrote an article on the Hockey Writers purely about New Jersey. Very interesting team to follow in the offseason. The biggest piece I think that they could realistically get is Andreas Janssen, because I don't necessarily see him as part of the future. Didn't have the points, but some of his even strength metrics were actually okay, but nonetheless, just for pure value, he would be a nice fit for Seattle. From the young guys, if you're looking at this forward core, they're going to have to give up one or two of them. Nathan Bastian, I think, is maybe the best pick, a good defensive forward. Nick Merkley would be kind of the other guy. And Aaron Dell, if you're looking for a value goaltender, maybe third string goaltender, he played for Hextall. So that's the other note there. Chicago, I think the biggest piece here could potentially be Brett Connolly, who just wasn't a fit there. Was a good player for the Washington Capitals, of course, during their cup run. Dylan Strome would be the other one, but I don't know if the Hawks are willing to part with some center depth there. Dallas, again, looking at goaltenders, but I think he's maybe too much of a gamble at this point, given his injuries, and that would be Ben Bishop. $4.9 million left for 2 years.
Ooh,
Probably not the best value from this. Andre Sekera would be a good defenseman here at $1.5 million for 1 year. And then you look at a couple of UFAs. Jamie Alexiak, I've always liked him, and Sami Vatanen for that matter too. Winnipeg, I think some of the better finds out there would be somebody like, I can't remember if he's a UFA or not, would be Matthew Perreault. Stastny's, I think, a UFA as well, but he might want to be brought back. Dubois, 1 year left at $5 million. He might be the odd man out. Forbert and Pullman on the defensive side of things, they also played for Hextall, so I've written kind of making a case for either of them. I think Forbert, frankly, I think that Winnipeg should keep him, but I've seen like other comments in other articles where they're like, no, this guy's a pylon. So I haven't watched his game close enough to clearly make a proper judgment call on that. Nashville, I think the best value here would be if Grimaldi was actually exposed. He only has 1 year at $2 million left, and he played for Hextall. And then you also have, I think these guys are UFAs, so they could find some good middle six players in that market if they, start whispering sweet nothings. Eric Howla and Mikhail Granlund would be that, but, especially with Granlund, he's coming off a pretty expensive deal. So I don't know if he's going to give them the best value. Colorado is going to lose a guy in the middle six. There's no way around it. It could be Kadri, just because of he's been a no-show in the playoffs.
Yeah.
He's got 1 year left too, so it's something that they might part ways with. Burakovsky's, I would think that they would keep him, but they also have to be concerned about Saad. They might have to, as a result, forfeit someone like Donskoy, or even Nichushkin has played really well for them. And so I would like to see him stay with the team because, you know, he didn't work out as much in Dallas. So,
well, what about the defense in Colorado? It seems like it's inevitable that they may lose, you know, one of their top three guys because Johnson has a no trade or no move clause. But the rumors I've heard that Johnson has been willing to waive that in order so Colorado can protect, you know, Graves, for instance.
oh yeah, because Graves could easily get opened up otherwise. Yeah. I mean, that would be a saving grace for them when you have that defensive core in place already. Minnesota, there could be like a third line forward or maybe someone who could fit in the middle six, but I'm looking at Matt Dumba actually. 2 years left at $6 million. Good two-way defenseman because they've got the other three tied up. Suter's not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And of course, Spurgeon's the captain. And I know I'm forgetting somebody else off the top of my head because I like their defensive core in general. Carson Soucy would be another guy to take a look at. 2 years left at $2.75 million. Didn't really watch him that much this year. Really liked what I saw from him last year, though. So I wouldn't put it past the Kraken to maybe snatch him up.
If you're Minnesota, aren't you thinking, okay, well, let's trade this guy before the expansion draft and let's just get some prospects, some draft picks, whatever, as opposed to just seeing him walk.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We can't rule that out. Lastly, with the St. Louis Blues, my two picks for what I think is most likely would be probably either Sammy Blais, $1.5 million left for 1 year, or Tuzo has 1 year left as well at 1.375. So depth defenseman there.
All right, we made it. We got through the list. That's fantastic. So before we let you go, tell everyone where they can find you on YouTube, on social media, and with the Hockey Writers.
Of course. So you can go to thehockeywriters.com and go to the Seattle Kraken page, and I'm there, of course. And you can sign up for their newsletter. So that's one component. On YouTube, again, my channel is Twisted Wrister Hockey, and I put out content usually a couple times a week if I'm not too busy with other stuff. So that's what I kind of aim to do there. I'm on Twitter at Nick_Pinkerton. So that's my name. And you can always just type in Twisted Wrister at the search and you'll find me there. And then I'm also on Instagram. I don't have a huge presence there, but yeah, I upload some photos and silly stuff every now and then, some dog pictures because I have a super cute dog.
That's cool. For anyone who wants to dive into more of Nick's material and his online presence, I'll put some links up in the description box so you can check him out directly. Nick, thank you so much for collabing with me today and going through the Kraken's list. I would love to have you back on at some point. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for watching. Remember, please be kind to each other in this crazy world we're living in right now, and we'll see you soon.